Hi, welcome back to the SportsKhabri podcast. And today we are going to talk not about Indian football. For a change, we are going to talk about English football and in particular Manchester City. And to talk about it, we have with us Arunava Chaudhuri once again, Kaustubh Pandey once again, and we have with us today Pranay, who is a Man City fan and the man behind Tackle from Behind, an Indian YouTube channel about all things football. So that's just us today, guys. We are going to sit here and we're going to talk about what has been going on in Manchester City off the pitch. So let's just start off right away because earlier this month, Premier League brought against Manchester City charges in excess of 100, and they circulated around financial irregularities, lack of transparency on Manchester City's part. This is obviously alleged, so we need to talk about it as such. And this is alleged to have happened between 2008 and 2009 and 2018. And so the round about 15 days have passed since then. City have vehemently denied, and they have said that they will legally see what can be done to make sure that they come out clean out of this one. So yes, so one by one, I will start asking you guys. Pranay, let's start with you because I think a fan's insight into this is something that I, for one, have not heard enough about. A lot of people have been explaining a lot about what this means for City, what this means for things in general. But as a fan, how you felt when this particular allegations immediately came up like 14 years ago?
I felt deja vu because we have been put in a similar position by UEFA as well. And, like when this eventual news came out, when the UEFA news came out, that is something that was very, uh, you know, very shocking for me as well, because that was like an imminent ban for 2 years and, whatnot. But then we all know what ended up happening. We went to CAS and then we got the decision ruled for us. So I wasn't really shocked because this is something that this is something that we have faced before. And this time it was from the Premier League, and the first after reactions that we got was even from our board as well, where they were shocked as well because they even our board wasn't aware of that either until they got the notice from the Premier League. So first reaction was the same. I mean, it was kind of something that not very shocking for me, because we have seen particular of these incidents happening to us in the past as well. But this time, since it was the Premier League, and when I read the whole statement that we cannot even go to the higher authorities this time, and we have to settle it amongst with the Premier League. So that is something that also brought me some confusion. But as per after the developments that have been done, we've got some of the best lawyers right now to look after this. And like the first state from the board was as well that they want to clear this mess for once and for all. So I trust the board. I saw Pep's reaction after that as well. He feels pretty confident. So that's where my stand is.
Right. So Pranay brings up an interesting point, Arnava, and I'll come to you. And so I'll ask you same question. What was your first reaction? And I have a follow up dumb question because Pranay brings up the fact that unlike with UEFA, City were able to take their case to Court of Arbitration of Sports, and this time it's said that they are not able to. So first, what was your reactions when the allegation surfaced? And second, why are not they in a position to take it to CAS?
I think the first thing was the timing. I think the timing was the one which I think surprised many. I think not only Manchester City as a club, but I think other clubs, other teams as well, because this has been ongoing for 4 or 5 years. And the question has been there, and allegations, of course, have been flying left, right, and centre. It's a general question in European club football in regard to sponsorship deals and evaluations of those. Again, City and especially Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain have been at the forefront of this due to ownership of the royal families, or involvement of the royal families in Abu Dhabi as well as in Qatar. But questions have also been raised in the past about sponsorship deals of Barcelona with Qatar Airways, or even now the Spotify deal, with Real Madrid's deal with Emirates, or generally Emirates deals across Europe. Where I remember the discussion here in Germany going on, Hamburg being one of the clubs and getting relegated to the second tier, and their sponsorship deal actually being still inflated for second division standards in Germany. So therefore, this discussion has been gone for quite a while, and I think the question that needs to be asked, of course, is what is the real value of sponsorship? Is it 1 million? Is it 5 million? Is it 50 million? Is it 100 million? That's a general discussion that needs to be had, because what the Premier League might say that definition is not there. Marketeers will tell you, I try to sell something for the maximum. What is the involvement of my owner? What is the involvement of my sponsor in this? This discussion can be had even, I always say the German context, where of course we have a different structure of club football, where the clubs are owned by the fans. And therefore that is a question that needs to be decided. But there are other allegations, of course, of their manager of the time not only being paid by the club, but being paid by a sister club in the UAE. Other payments being done here and there. Again, we know how the late Mino Raiola used to do the deals of the players, and get his share, or which is sort of FIFA is trying to control the amount of money that agents can earn. So there's a lot of questions that are being put in there. And if you see, and I just got it in front of me, the details of the breaches, as they call it, it's quite a long list, and we've got over 100 points that are there. But the question to me is okay, if the Premier League is investigating Manchester City, what is happening to the other clubs? And the UEFA example to me also shows is that also some of the biggest clubs have been looked at. Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, Barcelona, Real Madrid have been looked at. Nothing seems to happen really to the big ones. You really hang the small ones. The clubs from Eastern Europe get the fines, get suspensions, get thrown out of competitions. But at the end of the day, you also know the value of these clubs that they hold for your competition. And the question is, again, England as an example, QPR got its fine. What did you do with West Ham at the time of the Davis case? You gave Sheffield United a lot of money, but Sheffield United got relegated, and Sheffield United thereafter have been coming up and down, but I've struggled. So therefore, the question remains is, what kind of a punishment are you going to hand out to the club, which is on one side fair, but what are you going to do with the other entities which are there? Because this is replicated in most of the clubs. Of course, the City Football Group, as they work, or Manchester City, are very, very closed guarded about their financial facts and figures. The others do that as well. So therefore, there's a lot of other questions that crop up, and it's not just a City problem. I think it's a general problem for most of the clubs at the top in across not only Europe, but I would say around the world.
And why is it that this case cannot be taken to CAS if City lose it?
Because the Premier League has clearly stated that you have to remain within the framework of the Premier League. Now, theoretically, it's always a discussion if you can go to CAS or cannot go to CAS. I think you could go to CAS, because CAS would then most probably again decide in favor of City at the time in 2018 when they decided in favor of City against UEFA. Again, you put out a fine, so you say, listen, actually you've done something wrong, but you've not done something wrong. So therefore, it's a very, 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 very tricky a business, and it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy solution. The Premier League wants a solution to this, but again, I ask the question is, will you look at figures of, let's say, a Manchester United who've commercially been more successful than ever before in the last few years, despite off-field failures? Will you look at what has happened at Liverpool? The Saudis now own Newcastle. Look at how Todd Bowley and his group came in to take over Chelsea. Look at other teams, their ownerships, Nottingham Forest. Again, that a lot of things can be discussed. And therefore, the question is, will the Premier League hurt its own business? I say that it is their business. Or are they going to look at the football side of things? Because if they were looking at the football side of things, a lot of things that have happened over the last 15, 20 years, or actually since the creation of the Premier League 31 years ago, would have not happened. Because the Premier League, at the end of the day, if we are romanticizing about football and the way it is, then, nobody should be actually supporting the Premier League and what it's done, and or the UEFA Champions League for that matter as well.
Right. Kaustubh, I will come to you now. Same question. What was your initial reaction? And a follow-up question to that, is there any similarity between what has been going on with Man City and Juventus' Plusvalenza case in Serie A? So is there any similarities, or if they aren't, what are the differences and how different it is from what's going on over there? I think in hindsight, it's been only 3 weeks or 4 weeks since the first ruling actually came out from the Premier League and City that responded to it. I think since then there have been some Super League developments as well. So I think we also need to keep in mind the very fact that the rest of Europe, by the rest of Europe, I mean the rest of the top four major leagues in Europe, are now in this stance where they don't want the Premier League to dominate, because the Premier League is now an entity in itself. It's this massive financial entity, a massive cocoon which pretty much dominates Europe in general. I mean, the Premier League earns more than the rest of the top four leagues. It earns more than the rest of Europe essentially. So I think the rest of Europe now know that there's this massive entity which is pretty much hurting our business or hurting our clubs, hurting our very existence. So if you look at all of what's happened over the last 3 weeks and put that into a bigger picture, I think we'll see that the timing of it, I think I mentioned it as well, that the very timing of it is crucial, because it came when the Premier League was about to release documents about an independent regulation coming into the Premier League. And secondly, they knew that the Super League is being talked about, and the Premier League, just like the other rest of the four leagues, it's cautious about its very existence, its very product, it's very, it's cautious about the Premier League brand name essentially. So I mean, these allegations have come in when the Premier League's reputation is basically on the line, where they had this risk of an independent regulator coming in and having how things happen in the Premier League, having a say over certain things in the Premier League, which may or may not have been right over the last few years. I mean, be it the Super League scandal a couple of years ago, or, a lot of these ownerships and all, and the shady deals that have taken place, or the Chelsea thing. So I think the timing's really crucial in this Man City case. And I think, considering how geopolitical football's become, I think it's probably one of the biggest aspects of this thing. And especially considering the fact that the Premier League's running away from every single league in Europe. And we saw that debate on Sky Sports. I mean, that clip involving Jamie Carragher went viral on Twitter, where he was saying that he was basically talking about how the Premier League's product is essentially better than that of La Liga, because La Liga very much focused on those top two clubs, whereas the Premier League is trying to spread their revenue across all their 20 clubs. So I think a lot of it comes down to the Super League scene as well. And I think, in a way, a lot of us were expecting it. I mean, expecting in the sense that we knew that something was going on, a bit like Juventus, as you rightly mentioned, that there were certain things which have gone on over the last decade or so, which have come under legal scandal, but no one's been punished for it. I mean, Juventus were punished for it, but that's a completely different case, because in Italy there was a match fixing scandal in about 2010 or somewhere, when a lot of players, even Antonio Conte himself, was mad. So I think it was similar to that, where we knew something was going to happen. If not now, then probably some years down the line, and it clearly has happened. And as I said, the timing of it is really crucial in this case. But when it comes to similarities between what City have done and what Juventus did, I think there's a point which connects both of them, and it's that swap deal involving Joao Cancelo and Danilo. And that deal was actually investigated in the Juventus case, where they were handed a 15-point deduction, which is still ongoing, and they can still be handed a further points deduction for another investigation. I think the ruling for that takes place on the 26th or 27th of March. So it's not over yet for Juventus, but I think the nature of the accusations that have been made, I mean, in City's case, it's an accusation. In Juventus' case, it's completely different. The sort of accusations that have been made are quite similar. I mean, there's over 100 breaches that been talked about, but at least some of them are quite the same. Where what Juventus did is that it was a simple case of money laundering, basically, where they sort of illegally mentioned their finances. Say if a player was worth 2 million and he was leaving for a certain Serie B club, Juventus in their own accounts mentioned that the player was worth 5 million, which is slightly, I mean, not just slightly, it's quite similar to what City have done. Although I think City's case is much more complex, much more than simple money laundering or simply inflating the numbers, their financial numbers. But I think on paper it's quite the same, even though City have done a lot more as per the allegations. But I think the way Juventus were sort of handed that 15 points reduction, I don't think that can happen in the Premier League. I mean, at least not now, because this case is going to take about 3-4 years minimum to for all the the cases to all to be sorted out, of the independent body to be involved and have an independent hearing over how things have been, listen to City's version of events, and then look at the Premier League's own version of events as well. So I think the end result of it can be very different, but on paper it's still similar to what Juventus have done.
So one question that the reason I brought up the Juventus comparison is because one thing that I was able to make out that's common is inflation of fiscal numbers. So which is something that Arunava you pointed that City are saying that our sponsorship value is this much, and City Premier League are coming back with, okay, how do you evaluate it is this and not this? And with Juventus case as well, they inflated the player sales, the amount they were getting in player sales, and especially with players that could not can simply be considered could not accrue that kind of amount. So the question here is, from a legal standpoint, if you are charging whether Juventus or the Man City, how do you bring that charge? How do you come back and say, okay, this deal that you're saying is worth 5 million, it can't be 5 million, it's 1 million? Like, what legal ground do you have to stand on to go to a club and say that what you are saying, the evaluation of it is different? How do you find that?
I think there are 2 points to try and explain over here. One is what Kaustubh said is a very Italian way of doing business, is that I loan players and I inflate values, or I have buyback clauses and this and that and everything. So the Italian transfer market is a very weird one, where you see why do players very often go to, let's say, a club like Genoa, right? That has been a club where you've parked a lot, or Palermo or whatever. You've literally parked players over there and you've inflated values. Here we're talking about sponsorship money, where you say, let's say Etihad Airways is your sponsor, and you say the value of an Etihad sponsorship should be in the region of 5 to 10 million at the time. But Etihad paid 50 million. If Etihad's, again, you could argue from the other side, you said, hey, Etihad gets so much of global mileage out of it that they're willing to pay those figures. So again, Emirates is the other example. Especially the airlines, Qatar Airways is the other one. They have gone out into this market and have inflated prices quite a bit. Look at, for example, also the Chevrolet deal at the time at Man United, which was a ridiculous amount. And people were saying is like, you don't operate in the European market space, but you're actually going into Europe to try and push the product. And then, of course, Man U in the end said, listen, Chevrolet in the end said, listen, we are pushing this to a global audience. And you know what, for example, Chevrolet's state is in India, they no longer sell cars in the market. So therefore, the question is what is the evaluation that there is? There are, of course, independents, the big four consultancy firms set out certain figures, and say, listen, this is the value of what your front of shirt sponsorship could be, because that's your reach, that's the amount of people you're able to attract via broadcast, via social media, via indirect advertising and other things. And on the other side is, what is the valuation of it? And that's the interesting part, is of what value do you see? It's like also with PSG suddenly got Accor as a French hotel group and front of the shirt instead of an Emirates, which was interesting. You had an Emirati brand on front of your shirt instead of with the Qatari owners. That even Accor was paying more than they normally should have, but Accor thought that that there is a value on one side to do this sponsorship and push a product. So therefore, the valuation is always very, very difficult. I go back 2 decades when Everton had a Huawei sponsorship, and Huawei was a purely Chinese brand, but they had 2 players, Doué amongst them, playing for Everton at the time, and that figure was quite inflated as well. So therefore, this judgment of are you supposed to get 5 million and you're getting 50? Just throwing out figures. It's a very difficult thing. And on the other side, I think the other problem that City has is that they were not very open regarding their books with the Premier League, because the licensing in the Premier League from the way I understand it, is not like it is, for example, in Germany. In Germany, you have to be very, very open and frank with your books, with the Bundesliga every year. And if you don't do it, you'll get your punishment directly in the next season. And therefore, I mean, the Premier League has let this go on for a decade before stepping in, and they thought that, that the UEFA judgment would take care of it, and they would not have to step in. And that's the interesting part. And then you have an independent body. The Premier League is being looked at by the UK government as well in its structures. They're not saying that that it's inclusive enough. So there are multiple issues which are cropping in, and the question is Manchester City like the scapegoat of what is happening and what is all wrong according to British politicians in English football?
Right. So, Arunava, you raised points about the inflation and how the Premier League is setting itself up for quite an interesting predicament, because if you start going after Man City, where do you stop? Kaustubh, you point out the fact that however long this investigation takes, that it's going to take quite a while. This is not a result that's going to surface immediately. Pranay, I will come back to you on this because I have a hypothetical question. Let's say that wherever the result comes, the result arrives against Man City. And let's imagine both sides of the scenario. Let's imagine the best case scenario in which they are slapped with a pocket money fine and then they are allowed to go away scot-free. Or they are immediately thrown out of the Premier League. It's not going to happen, but it's a very hypothetical scenario, because I want to gauge how exactly will that change your relationship with the club if they were to no longer be in the Premier League, because even the Football League has absolutely no mandate to take them in. So if we are going into that hypothetical, if they are thrown out of the Premier League, even the Football League could come back and say, as professional clubs, we have no reason to take you as well. So you go to the Vanarama, the 5th tier, the semi-professional tier. So no matter what happens, whether it's a paltry fine or it's a complete throwout, how would that affect your relationship with the club if you find out that yes, they are found guilty of having breached these financial rules?
I mean, then I'll look for, I'll probably put a request to Hotstar to start streaming, Division 2 games on their app. That's the last thing that I would accept. But I mean, my whole judgment, or how the way I look at it as a fan, is again like the pointers which was mentioned by Arunava sir as well, that the timing of it really doesn't make sense. In the best possible way, I think, for me, if they're found guilty, of course there should be punishment. That is where I completely stand from that perspective. If they're found guilty, then punish. That's as it is. Like if you see it in Serie A, like you've seen Juventus getting a lot of points deduction. But I think somehow I think Premier League wants to, since over the years this has been done by multiple, clubs. I'm not going to repeat again, but I think this is something that Premier League wants to make an example out of. Like that is something that Premier League has a position to stand out. And I think even apart, when I see other fans and the other clubs, what they already found, like they already think that City is guilty, but they haven't really seen if that is something that they want to set example of, there might be a lot of shady things which has been going on for their clubs forever. So I think the way I look at it is the same. I just don't I think whatever has been done, there might be some of the loopholes. There might be some of the loopholes that CFG has exploited. It's not an illegal in any way, which again the court is there to decide. There are way superior things that have been done on the backside of it. So that is where I see it. Even for the CFG, when I see the A-League thing that happened, the transfers thing that happened when, Melbourne City can't, like in the A-League, you can't transfer players, and then we still did it by a loophole. And then they passed a particular, transfer clause just for CFG, because in the A-League, you can't transfer players, and, that's how we did it. We did it legally. I mean, there were shouts before that you cannot do it. On the rule book, it says, it cannot be done, but we still executed. And there has been multiple deals, like even, like Arun sir said, even in Serie A, that these, to inflate transfer values and all of those things, that has been there. But on the face of it, at the end of the day, our, everyone's doing the same thing. And if it has been found guilty, then punish. But the 3-month period or the 4-month period, Premier League coming and saying to us, okay, we want to finish this in, let's say, by end of the season, we want to give you punishment now. And the other clubs are also interested in it. Of course, they're interested in it because they want to play Europe. There are clubs, which directly get affected. A fifth position or a eighth position directly affects their revenue for the next season. So that is something that I just can't digest as a fan. And rest of the things, if that happens, that's if what it is. But I think maybe a minimum of 2-3 years, there should be a fair investigation to be done on this. And that's it. Like if it's then found guilty, then I'm ready to accept the charges. But if it's gonna happen in 3-4 months without a fair trial, I think that is something that Premier League then really needs to look upon. And even the other investors, Premier League is such a big, it's the topmost pinnacle of footballing world. They will, if they want to make an example out of Man City doing something, and seeing other investors, there have been a lot of talks of even FSG sales, for United sale. All the money is coming from Middle East. If they want to do something like that, it is going to directly impact their fair share of revenue out of the pool, like the money that they earn. So yeah, I mean, and club like Man City playing in even a Division 2, I think that will be something that will be even for a big loss for Premier League. I mean, we've got all of the superstars players play in the top 4, top 6 club in the Premier League. So that is where the whole revenue of the pool where Premier League eventually gets it. Man City, I think in the past 5 years, we've signed all the best players, like be it KDB, Haaland. These are the players in the Premier League that they, leagues couldn't have afford. They want to retain these kind of players to play in their leagues. But we have done it. If it doesn't happen, it's all gone. So let's see.
Interesting. So Nava, I will come back to your point and the overarching point that you make about the Premier League, which is if you start investigating Manchester City, which other club do you go after, whether you even go after them, or where exactly do you stop? So the Premier League that exists today, even its financial might and everything, it has been happening on the back of the way Premier League came into being in 1992, and the hyper corporatization of the community institutions of the Premier League that has happened over the years, and the near unchecked investment that has been allowed to flow into the clubs compared to what you have in Germany, France, and Spain and Italy. So this is where Premier League stands, and now it has decided to bring about these kind of investigations, and they have started with Manchester City. So my question is, like, you can feel free to explain more on the fact if they are to start to try making examples of clubs, of their own clubs, the clubs that are bringing them most profits, where exactly do they go from Manchester City? And in doing this, in the point that Pranay made, you could shirk investors away potentially if you do this. And if you are going after City, let's say you go after Liverpool next, let's say you pick up United after that. And are you it could Premier League inadvertently push their big clubs away and into the arms of the Super League, which is rising away again in the far, which is again rising away. And it's the way football has been moving over the past 3 decades, it's kind of inevitable that the Super League will come into play. It's just a matter of when. So these are the two questions. Where do Premier League go from here? And what are they pushing the clubs away from themselves and into the arms of the Super League?
I first had a tip for Pranay. Start supporting Mumbai City. So you're then safe, right? You got a Champions Club over there in India as well. So
I support Mohun Bagan though, but that's okay.
Oh no, please. That's then you've nothing much to add as a Bengali when you say Mohun Bagan to that. Then you know which club I support family-wise. No, jokes apart. I think the Super League is, you've mentioned it. I think the Premier League. And it's a very interesting thing when we talk about what happened around the Super League, and that especially the fans in England went against it. So it was not the fans in Spain, it was not the fans in Italy, in Germany, and again Bayern Munich. I know personally that this whole Super League plan was drawn up by Dr. Gerlinger at Bayern at the time, and I remember we had conversations about what they wanted to do, and I think there is an Americanization of European sports. that's happened. If you see the way that, for example, basketball is run over here, you have some of the biggest footballing entities, very, very successful in basketball, be it a Barca, be it a Real, Bayern plays there. You've got Besiktas in there. You've got, in the past you would have said the Russian sides are in there. The sides from the Balkans are there who also have football teams. And it's what you've seen also with especially with the NFL and in the NBA, is that there is this sort of a structure which is more American, which is more closed shop. And that is something which the Super League offers. And I think there's a big fear in most of the leagues. Look at the way that Senor Tebas is trying to fight Real Madrid and Barca over the whole Super League issue. Has brought in huge investments, and they've changed the whole strategy in Spain of saying, listen, we focus on the top 2.5. I add the half of Atletico. And now they're sort of saying, listen, we're supporting, not only the La Liga, but La Liga 2 teams as well. And we're trying to elevate and ensure that the Sevillas and San Sebastians and all these other clubs have a chance, Villarreals, to compete with the big ones. But they're so far away that this gap, you can't bridge that gap anymore. Similar things can be said in Italian football, and Kaustubh will be better knowledgeable than me, that you've brought in foreign investors, and there've been quite a number of failed investments, especially the Chinese who've come in, and we've seen that as well. A friend of mine works at Grasshopper Zurich, this sort of a sister club of Wolverhampton, and if I hear stories about what has happened at that club, it's sometimes it's bizarre of what has happened. The question is, how will European / country football survive? Will sort of the Premier League be sort of the prime sort of product, or will Champions League football at some stage, or the European Super League, move into weekend slots? Are we, that's a question that will come. And I said it, I've been saying this for the last 5 years. Most of my friends who sort of support the Dortmunds, the Schalkes in this world don't want to realize that, as that's the question is not if the Super League is going to come, the question is when. And the question is, are the leagues strong enough to sustain that challenge? Or are the leagues going to implode in a certain way that they drive their biggest clubs away? This whole instance with Man City is it gives Man City, despite the Premier League putting all these new clauses in, and if you leave off, you're going to be thrown out of the league and all that stuff. It would be funny if a Man City leaves the Premier League, joins the European Super League, and then says, listen, we'll play in the Championship. The English Football League would be the happiest in the world, because suddenly they can challenge the Premier League in regard to TV rights. Because if it happens to City, it will happen to other clubs as well. So the Premier League actually, in this whole instance, without realizing it, I think it's playing with its own future. And they also need to realize is that in England, your domestic television revenue is less than your international revenue. So the question is also and again, England is in decline. Brexit is a huge issue over them. They are literally imploding at the moment. So you need to attract other investors. The point, as a friend of mine made the other day, is, do you bring in millionaire investors? Do you bring in small-time billionaire investors? Or you bring in the super wealthy billionaire investors? I think City is a very, very good example of how it can be done in a positive way, despite all the criticism that there is on the investment. But City Football Group not only has invested in the club, but it is invested in the city. And I think that happens very, very rarely. It does happen. The Thais have invested in Leicester, for example. There are positive examples. But there are other examples where investors were wanting to do stuff. Roman Abramovich, a good example. But the City of London has not allowed Chelsea to really grow. Not only them, the others as well. Chelsea has been blocked. The opportunities that you're given to a Tottenham, to an Arsenal, was blocked. Why? Because Roman Abramovich is a Russian investor. So there is a bigger discussion that needs to be had. We could expand it in regard to racism, about, people with our skin color, brown people. Why are they not part of the English football system? They want the money from abroad, but they don't want the baggage which is part and parcel of this. But I would say, if you look at the City Football Group example, I said Red Bull is another ecosystem which has been building around, but there's a lot of criticism here in Germany. But from a football perspective, sometimes these investments have actually been better than the traditional clubs. If we talked about Liverpool 5-6 years ago, when Klopp came in, Liverpool were a story, right? They were talking about the 90s and their successes, and once in a while they've won a Champions League. Manchester United, okay, are on an up trajectory at the moment under Erik ten Hag. But again, what have they won over the last 10 years since Sir Alex is gone, right? Some people will talk about Leeds United. Leeds United was the first club about 2 decades ago to collapse. So therefore, there's a lot of discussions which need to be had. And again, also, I call on people who are watching us at the moment is, do question the people who have opinions about matters. There are a lot of experts with certain links who have certain opinions about things. And again, you rarely will have an ex-City player talking about these things. You will have mainly players from Man United and Liverpool speaking about these things, and their opinion is not anti-City because of the City Football Group, but it's anti-City because it's City. So therefore, there's a lot of these multiple issues. There are much bigger things in play that there are, and again, I think as much as fans want to be part of the conversation, and again, I don't want to take away that sort of that notion, but or the romanticism in it is that there are decisions being taken in the boardroom, and they're hard and tough decisions, and they've been taken in the best interest of the game. If we talk about these things about City Football Group, yeah, we Pranay mentioned Melbourne City. The same thing has been done at Mumbai City with players on loan coming out of the City Football Group who don't appear in the wage bill of where there is something in the ISL as well. And look at how Chelsea has worked around rules which are there in European club football in doing the signing spree in the winter, and UEFA and FIFA will now step in and change the rules. So therefore, you have smart people who try and weave their ways around it. And I think, with looking at the lawyers that City have employed, I mean, some of the lawyers are getting as much money as the players are on a weekly basis. It's an insane amount. They will find a way. And I think if it's again, La Liga, again, for me, is a prime example. La Liga would shoot themselves in the foot if they would get rid of Barca and Real Madrid. I take the German example, and I've mentioned it a few times, the example of Schalke. Schalke 5 years ago was a club which was regularly playing Champions League, but their finances were totally screwed. The Bundesliga allowed the club with the third highest number of members in German football to go down the league. Look at the Italians. Kaustubh will be better informed than me. They pushed Juventus, the biggest entity that they have, they pushed down. The question is if the Premier League is going to risk sending City down to the Championship, or maybe even down to the fifth division, to the National League. Because then the question arises, will others invest into the Premier League? And also, will the interest in the Premier League be as big? And will the players also be willing to go to the Premier League? And Erling Haaland will then think twice if he would go to a City or to another club, or would say, you know what, I like Germany, let me go to Bayern, they also pay good money, they play good football, I can win the Champions League, let me go there. So there are all these other factors there inside. It's not, if it was a pure financial decision, again, I think from what is known in public domain or the infos that I have, I think it can be proven that money, the sponsorships have been inflated, people have been paid on the sides, but that has happened at multiple clubs. Are you then, let's say Jorge Mendes, are you going to question then Wolverhampton? Therefore, again, it's not just about one club. It's the pyramid of English football. Will you go into the Championship? Will you question clubs over there? Will you go into League One, League Two? Will you look at Salford City? Where the class of '92 has invested. So therefore, the whole English pyramid would have to be checked. And I think then the Premier League would most probably look at the 7th, 8th, or 9th tier of clubs and have to bring them up to the Premier League because all the other clubs have sort of something in their closet.
Right. So let's take the wider angle on the City situation, and because you mentioned the Red Bull Empire doing good stuff when it comes to the football and its investment. What does this mean for the City Football Group, the one that has been operating under City banner worldwide with different sister clubs of Man City? So what does this mean? What has exactly happening with them over the past 2-3 weeks when this news of financial breaches have broken, and what exactly does it mean for them in the future? Regardless of whether this verdict goes.
You want it from me or you wanted someone else to answer?
Yeah. Please take it.
I think if you see how City Football Group has built themselves over the last few years with their global network of clubs, you see New York City FC is its own club. They have their own strengths in MLS. and they're quite strong over there. Melbourne City has built itself in a certain way, established himself in Australia. If I happily look back at how Mumbai City FC has built itself over the last 2-3 seasons and build its structure. I think they have by far the strongest structure in Indian football. I think there's a value that the City Football Group brings to these clubs. Also, the way if you see that certain Indian players might be going to Europe in the summer, at least on training camps, stints, or maybe even signing contracts within the City Football Group. I think it's certainly of value. Or look at even the scouting network. You were early enough able to get a Julian Alvarez to sign for you. Bring in a player. You've parked players at Girona or at Lommel or at Troyes or even in New York or Melbourne at the time. To bring in an old story. I was crazy enough in 2014 when the Super League was being founded. I went to City Football and said, you know what, I would love to do a tab with you guys. Can you loan us Frank Lampard and David Villa for the first season of the Super League? They didn't take it seriously at the time, but later on they realized, you know what, there is an entity called Mumbai City FC in India. Let's try and do something and try to bring them on board and utilize that club in India and maybe utilize it also for Man City down the road. So therefore, again, you can question certain financial transactions and certain dealings, but some of these sort of younger entities, I call them entities rather than clubs, but entities like a City Football Group, like a Red Bull universe. I think there is no marketing company like Red Bull in the world of sport. They are just phenomenal. Look at football. In Formula One, you're competing with the biggest car brands in the world. You just produce this tin. You just produce this tin of an energy drink, and of course of action sports. So therefore, these entities are doing things. You've got other entities who are now trying to replicate that model. 777 Partners. There's this Iranian origin guy who's trying to do an investment also now coming on board. Therefore, these models are being copied. Of course, a lot of money is needed. Billions have been put in. But don't forget that the City Football Group even got investment, out of other investments. There's Chinese investments, there's American investments who've come into this whole ecosystem to help them build. And therefore, again, we go back to the question of sponsorship. If we want to look at the sponsorship, if we look at even salaries of sports athletes, all of it is way inflated. No player is worth the money that these guys, is Cristiano Ronaldo worth 200 million? Simple question. Is a human being worth 200 million a season, a year? No. So therefore, if you want to romanticize football and go back, then we need to, I love to go and watch my 6th division team play because that's, I say, real football. And at the top level, anywhere in the world, there's so much of money in play. It's a business at the end of the day. I have teams which I support or which I favor. And again, having worked also for the City Football Group on projects, I know how they work. And that's quite impressive. And I think, that's why I think there is a broader picture that needs to be built for these clubs and the way they operate. And again, a bigger picture in regard to where football stands and where football needs to grow.
Right. So with that said, we are now reaching the end of today's podcast. So I will now start taking your closing statements. Kaustubh, I will begin with you. So keeping in the mind the timing of these breaches that have been brought against City, keeping into mind the fact that an 80-team Super League has already been talked about in the background, keeping in mind the financial situations that Juve are going through, the situation that La Liga have ongoing with Barca, even with some things that have happened over the last couple of weeks. How exactly do you think this situation will snowball in the near future, and and how will it shape the European footballing situation as we currently know? Because a lot of changes are on the horizon. Because the Champions League is going to expand into that 10 league stage as well. So, where exactly do you think football is going, at least in this decade?
So, I think we also need to consider the fact that the very foundation of the Premier League back in 1992 was based on the fact that Margaret Thatcher was then in power in the UK. She wanted to make sure that Premier League becomes this, this power which showcases a certain amount of Britishness into, essentially portrays a certain amount of Britishness into the world, which is what India has tried with the IPL as well. So, and when the Premier League was founded, they wanted to create this closed competition as well, one of the very first propositions from the 6 or 7 clubs at that point was that they wanted to create this league which was closed, which clearly shows that the Premier League, it's not just now that the Premier League cares about its own brand value, its own clubs, or the very fact that it needs to use a certain amount of soft power into the product, into the Premier League, and the way it functions and the style of play, which has obviously evolved from, the hoop ball tactic or the 4-4-2 tactic to what Pep Guardiola has brought into the English game with his innovations. I think over time, I think the Premier League will know that the very reputation of English football has changed. It's not about how it used to be. It's not that when it comes to playing style or how the Premier League is seen as a British product. Essentially, it's not seen as this massive global entity. It's seen as a very English entity where, stadiums are polished. The product is really heavily marketed. You have these bright colors across your advertisement screens at the back. The pitches are very, very much glowed up. So I think we also need to consider the fact that the Premier League knows all of these factors, and with that, they'll know that City being the very biggest entity which represents all of these values, these British values, basically now in 2023, they'll know that they basically can't afford to get rid of City or impose these massive bans or transfer bans or these fines. Because you look at, this is a very recent case when Arsenal were taking on Man City. It was played on the very same day where Club Brugge were playing Benfica, I think, and Dortmund were playing Chelsea. And those are Champions League games, by the way, which actually matter. Those are not your random group stage games. And City were actually playing it. And you pretty much came across the fact that a lot of people were more invested in that Man City Arsenal game than they were in the rest of the Champions League games. At that, in essence, tells you the very fact that the rest of the leagues, even if they come out with something called the Super League, as of now, they can't compete with it unless they improve their own structures, they improve their own very grassroots structures. I'll come to what it do or what they don't do. They talk about these massive structures, about how the game should be marketed, how these broadcast deals should be executed, how much these broadcast deals cost and how much losses they make. But they ignore the very fact that their own footballing structures from the very grassroots are pretty much rotten. You can't have these massive ideas till the time you don't fix your very existence. The Premier League did that. And I think till the time the rest of the leagues don't do that, they can't survive even if they combine all the 4 leagues. Because we have these investors who know that they can't invest a certain amount of money into a Super League without having the guarantee of the fact that whether it will work out or not. Plus, we also need to consider the fact that JP Morgan was the firm which was trying to fund the Super League in the first place, and JP Morgan is quite close to Liverpool and Manchester United. And JP Morgan was one of the reasons why the Giants actually took over United in the first place back in 2005. So I think we need to consider those factors as well. And knowing that, I think there will be a point in the future. The case will obviously go on into the next 3-4 years, and a lot of changes can happen. City can win more titles. City can lose their current ownership. You never know what happens in football. But I think there will be a time when the Premier League realizes all of this, and they realize that the Super League, the idea of the Super League, can't compete with the Premier League. And at the end of it, I think the very, from my perspective, I think the most justified move will be to make sure that have a transfer ban in place. I've spoken about this before as well. We have a transfer ban in place to make sure that City rely on their academy, which is already pretty much thriving, and they work with it. Have this transfer ban so that the other clubs manage to catch up with the club, with Man City themselves. And at the end of it, Man City come out of it in the next 2 years during the transfer ban period as a rejuvenated unit, essentially, which I don't think will harm for the Premier League product. But we have had transfer bans in the Premier League before with Chelsea. And we've seen transfer bans in the rest of Europe as well. With Atletico Madrid, we had Spezia and Serie who had a transfer ban, although it was lifted later. But I think even though it will be a ban, but I think City will have enough resources to fall back on. And they'll have this the Premier League will have this assurance that Man City will be there. There's a higher chance that they'll keep those players that they already have
and the Premier League essentially retains the value. Right. Arunava, your thoughts on the matter?
I think the Premier League is playing with its own future. I think that's the. I think a lot of people don't understand that the Super League danger is a real danger for especially the Premier League. I think the other leagues can thrive even if a Super League crops up. The question is, will it go the American way? Will it be a sort of a closed shop thingy where you sort of even say, you are not going to play your local league, that the Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, Ligue A and the Bundesliga will lose their best clubs to the Super League, that they play an NFL type of format and, closed door, 20-team competition, and you play your National Cup competition and you're sorted. That's one. I think on the other side, I find it quite hypocritical from the other clubs to be sort of saying, hey guys, hey, throw them out. And it's like, you've got enough, skeletons in your own closet, I think. And it doesn't matter who it is. And again, as I said earlier, I think it's a danger for their structure because if you go after City, I think City are smart enough to also try and gather information about the other clubs and pass it on to the Premier League. There's no love lost amongst them, these sides. And I think the Premier League needs to be careful anyway where it stands at the moment. I think we are changing, the broadcasting ecosystem is changing quite dramatically. I was just reading a little earlier that Formula One in India seems to be going from broadcast to streaming. And the question is, will you be able to generate as much money via streaming that you have via broadcast? And again, if you look at what Star Sports used to pay a couple of cycles back and what they're paying now, it's India, but it's a paltry figure. And I think that will be replicated in other markets, which means that the Premier League's television revenues will reduce quite substantially over the next 2 cycles in the next 5 to 7 years. That's another problem for them. The question is now, how important are going to be foreign investors? If you go after City, will the Qataris, will Saudis, will, I don't know, whoever, be willing to spend those billions? Think about clubs were being sold for 200, 300, 400 million. They're now being sold for 3, 4, 5, 6 million, potentially maybe 10 billion is some figures that I hear. So therefore, that is it. And I think this we have to break the cycle about owners from the Arabian world being seen in a much more negative way than the Americans. If Abramovich had done what Todd Bowley has done, he would have been crucified by now. But Todd Bowley is getting away with murder at the moment in regard to what he's done. Even though I love the memes here in Germany after the loss last week against Dortmund in the Champions League. And the best meme was that, now he's trying to buy the whole Borussia Dortmund team because that's better than Chelsea, and he's going to sell the whole Chelsea squad to Dortmund. And that was my favorite one. So therefore, there is a lot of structural questions that there are. And it will also be interesting to see if the Premier League try to impose something. What kind of commitment does the City Football Group continue to have towards Man City? Or will they move to push their other teams in the other leagues? Would they suddenly be pushing Girona? Would they be pushing Troyes? Might they think about, hey, listen, the MLS is more exciting for us, that they might push New York City FC? So therefore, that danger is also there. I don't think that it's an opportunity because Man City is by far the biggest entity within that network. But you never know with the changing global ecosystem and you see Cristiano Ronaldo going to Saudi. You never know. They might say, listen, we're gonna invest into our local club in the UAE no more than anything else. And suddenly you see Erling Haaland, I don't know, playing in Abu Dhabi rather than playing in Manchester.
Right. So, Pranay, I wanted to come to you in the end because when you sit with the experts and talk about football becoming corporatized and a geopolitical tool for the nation states to play with each other, it's a very existential discussion that doesn't really leave on a brighten note. So, like the view of a fan, as infinitesimal as it may be, there is at least a moment of brightness where you can just talk about football as a and in a romanticization form. So I wanted to you to have the final say on the matter. Like, how do you feel about the breaching situation as you currently sit? What exactly do you think is in your heart when you think about how culpable Man City could be found at the end of all of this? And how would you be? How would your relationship with Manchester City be, regardless of whatever happens from this point onwards?
I mean, I'm gonna just say, I'm just gonna say what Kylian Mbappe said when he was asked about playing for PSG in 2021 season. So it's just like, I'll be there no matter what. That's what it is, man. Even if we play the Premier League, we play division, whatever, championship, the whole relationship with the club is not going to change. I'll continue supporting regardless of that. But I mean, for some extreme measures, if that do happen, that's what, if that is the fate where it lies, it is going to be. But I don't think so anything of that sort is going to happen. Maybe point deduction in the next season or the very next after that. It could be some hefty fines that Premier League wants to, grab some cash to, maybe they want some money out of City, so they have money and they can pay them. But that's what it is. I don't think so anything extreme measures, even on this discussion, on the panel discussion, like that I heard of the most of the points. But as we say, man, there's nothing. We are just feeding off of the information that we get from the sources, from England, from various other vested interests. That happens. If doesn't, then we're gonna just enjoy Man City winning the title another season, and that's it.
So yeah, that's as uplifting a note as I could expect to end this podcast on. That you will be there no matter what. So yeah, viewers, listeners, I don't know about you. This has been quite an exhausting podcast for me because my brain cannot take any more than this. So a wise man once said, "Football, bloody hell," and that's what I leave you with. That's all we have for today at the SportsKhabri podcast. We sign off now, and we will come back very soon with another topic. Cheerio.
Thanks. Bye.